Debt Nation, where we are putting death out of business. And today I have two very special guests here. It's an international forum. It's an international one today, as always international, but this is bigger and wider international because it's Australia, USA, who we're very familiar with, and also Europe, Belgium, coming in, swinging in there from Europe. So we're really, really excited to have that. The European perspective, we haven't got much of the European perspective so far. Jose Cordero, we've got a lot of UK with David Wood, Kate Lovechuck with arguably UK and Ukraine. So some of that Eastern European bloc, but we now have, that mid-tier European, geographic region, Belgium. So this is going to be really, really cool. So let's introduce everybody. So it's Associate Provost James Hughes. We'll start with you in the United States, over there in Boston. Can you just say hello? Who are you? Your interests and your work, etc. Thank you very much for coming on Debt Nation. Very excited to have you.
Pleasure to be here. Well, I'm the former executive director of the World Transhumanist Association, which then birthed the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies, which I'm director of, and author of the book Citizen Cyborg, and involved in a lot of different transhumanist projects over time. But I have to say, over the last couple of years, my principal project or fixation has been stopping the rise of fascism. So transhumanist things have taken a bit of a back burner for me as I became more politically engaged to fight Trump, etc.
Well, yeah. Well, don't exhaust yourself. That political stuff is a whirlpool, but it's a big exhausting mess. But if that's where you see everything going, congratulations and well done, and all the best to you in that way. You're in Belgium now. You're one of these guys who controls some of these other factors of communication. You have a Facebook page, it pumps out great content. You promote emerging technologies. Your large audience over there on that Facebook page, the Transhumanists. Tell us about running a Facebook page. Firstly, who are you? What's your background, all that sort of stuff, and then running a Facebook page, communicating these technologies, all that. How does that work?
Okay, first of all, I want to encourage you and say good luck, Mr. Hughes, towards fighting fascism. Sounds like a really important thing to do, no matter what the future brings. And then on the other hand, managing a Facebook page, well, after seeing Technocalypse of Frank Tess, also a Belgian guy, by the way, he traveled the world from the 90s until 2000, interviewing people and actually a little bit ahead of his time, going towards people that, were thinking and working on cloning, on the future, on nanotechnology and so on. After seeing that documentary, 3 hours, I think it is, I got the passion. I knew that we need to go forward, and so little people are informed, are aware of all the potential, may it be malevolent or benevolent. So I started the Facebook page after 2011, 2012. And never stopped looking for news and articles and fake news and trying to. If I asked my parents like 5 years ago if they would like to live longer, if quality of life is assured, they said no, and I was like, why not? It seems that there are a lot of misconceptions, a lot of misinformation, and it needs to go forward. We need to inform people more.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And Debt Nation here, where our tagline is mainstreaming transhumanism, because we want to see transhumanist talking points, technologies, the ethical debates, the political ideas. We want to see all of this at the forefront of modern society, and it has to be at the forefront of modern society. Otherwise, modern society is going to continue to go into a sinkhole, and that's kind of where it's going. You would know all about that, James, because you're fighting fascism, right? So that's your big thing, because you're worried that society's heading in the wrong direction. Why is that a cause that you've taken up? What is fascism for you? What do you see? What is the apart from the liberal sort of talking points, what actually on a deeper level is it that you're working against?
Well, I should say that one of the reasons why I got involved in transhumanism was because since I was a teenager, I've had three big passions in my life. One was left politics. I've been a socialist since I was, 17. The other was Buddhism, and I'm a former Buddhist monk. And the third was futurism and trying to figure out where we're going as a species. And when I discovered the transhumanist movement, and I was working on bioethics at the time and writing about bioethics, I got very passionate about the bioethical questions around transhumanism and how it related to both politics and futurism, of course, and Buddhism. I've been writing about the relationship of religion and transhumanism and the various things that a Buddhist perspective has to contribute to transhumanist ideas. In terms of why fascism is particularly pressing now, well, it's on the rise. I mean, we have now an increasingly authoritarian Chinese Communist Party, which rules over 1 billion people. We have Putin, Duterte, Modi, Trump, Orban in Hungary, Orban in Hungary, and Polish, fascists. There are fascists all over the place, and they're on the rise. And I don't think that, in fact, I never thought that at this point in history we would be relitigating democracy, the welfare state, and fascism. I thought that we would be well beyond that, and that we'd be arguing about rights for robots and what kind of genetic engineering should be made universally accessible to people. But the future has a couple things happening which I think are beginning to give rise to this fascist moment. One is that there's increasing economic insecurity as a result of the form of capitalism that we've developed over the last 40 years, this neoliberal form of capitalism, which is making young people in particular increasingly economically insecure, older people as well who get laid off from their jobs. Life expectancy in the United States and in Europe is stagnant and actually declining for some populations because of growing suicide, alcoholism, drug abuse, opioid crisis, etc. And one of the things that people are looking at in the future is technological unemployment as a result of robotics and automation. And we don't see it yet. It's not actually here yet. But people are worried that on top of all the economic insecurity they already face, and the obvious lack of concern about ordinary working people, that the ruling elites and the growing inequality and the billionaires who control our societies, that these particular kinds of challenges in the future will mean that working class people are going to be screwed. So that's why they're turning to fascism. That fascism is their first answer because most people don't have a more sophisticated political answer than, oh, maybe it's the black people, maybe it's the immigrants, maybe it's the Muslims, maybe it's the my neighbor. Eventually they have to figure out that it's actually the structure of society and the growing economic inequality that we face. So I think this is an incredibly pressing problem. But for transhumanists, it's also pressing because our discourse has also been dominated by billionaires. Peter Thiel does not represent the politics of the transhumanists around the world. I know because I ran the World Transhumanist Association. I surveyed them about their politics. I know what transhumanists actually represent, and they are not Epstein's, who had his private rape island and was taking scientists there for his transhumanist fantasies. It's not Peter Thiel, who's a libertarian for fascism and a Christian fundamentalist who supports Trump. The vast majority of transhumanists do not agree with those kinds of politics. So we need to be much more clear about the fact that we're on the side of freedom and democracy, and we haven't been very clear about that.
let's continue this talk. This is a really, really interesting talk. Yeah, I agree with a lot of the sentiments you just said there, and we bring up a lot of that structural issues with capitalism and automation and rising wealth inequality and the declining, the health span, the actual declining length of life. You're in Europe. There is a big fascist movement there because of the migrant crisis, because of again wealth inequality. Normal European politics going back forever of religion and France versus Germany and wherever. What do you see there in Europe? Do you see fascism on the rise as well, or do you see it as a different conception?
Well, I think Belgium is a very interesting example here in Europe. You already had the frustration in between the north and the south, where financial gains are not equal. So you have the north saying, we're working harder, we want to split up. And from this already, not being pleased, not being happy with the current state of government, let's say. On top of this came an immigration wave, which is totally understandable, is logical if you would go into the perspective of someone in a country where war and economic insecurity is just omnipresent. So it's everywhere, and depending on who you are with or how drunk people around you become, this fascist tendency seems to sprout in some people. I think I agree that personal frustration or things that are troubling in personal life are people are looking for a cause for it or a reason why it's going bad or why things are not as secure as just after a war. Let's call it what it is. So people are just blaming people that weren't here or speaking another language or having another culture, and it is plainly ridiculous. We are all together here on this planet, making divisions that shouldn't be there. Is just stupid towards the future, towards yourself now.
I'll just say.
Oh, sorry.
Let me just say one brief thing about the connection between the liberal ideas and transhumanism, which is that transhumanism actually is the application of Enlightenment ideas to modern biopolitics. And Enlightenment ideas haven't always been liberal. There are authoritarian forms of Enlightenment ideas, and there are liberal forms. So we do see transhumanists who are technophiles, who are enthusiastic about all the technologies that we're enthusiastic about, who have more authoritarian political views. So I'm not saying that, this whole debate about what's true transhumanism, whether liberal transhumanism or atheist transhumanism is the true transhumanism and the others are wrong. I think that's a bit of a red herring because there is no real transhumanism, but there is a tradition within the Enlightenment thought of liberalism, John Stuart Mill, et cetera, that I think we should be defending, that I defend. And we at least have to make clear that if there are going to be different kinds of transhumanists, what those different kinds are. Some are liberal and some are not.
What are some strategies that you've adopted? James? I'm not sure what to call you. Is it Provost the way to say it? I don't know. But Provost James, you got so many titles. I know. But anyway, what's some of the strategies? Obviously, you've taken this up. What's some of the strategies you've adopted in fighting fascism, and what's an outcome you would like to see? Is defeat Trump? Is that it? Like, if you defeat Trump, do all the problems go away, or is there other things that you need to do, or what's some, without giving the whole gameplay away? What's some of the tactics and strategies that you've enjoyed and deployed?
Well, as it relates to transhumanism, we decided a long time ago that we would like to raise a flag of a particular flavor of transhumanism that could, in fact, attract people who wouldn't consider themselves transhumanists for whatever reason. We call that techno-progressive politics, or techno-progressivism. And I think the techno-progressive approach is basically that there are certain public policy questions which which most people in public policy, most people in academia don't take seriously, because they don't think that the science and technology is advancing so quickly that they have to take seriously questions around life extension or nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, whatever. But we do. And we also think that the people who tend to take those seriously tend to be people who, or the people we hear about taking that seriously, tend to have either no political conception of the effects or critiques of those things, or they are often libertarians, at least in the American context. So raising a politically progressive critique and advocacy for certain kinds of technology. So for instance, with life extension, the things that determine life expectancy around the world are primarily social at this point. It may be that in the future we have more technological determination of life expectancy, but making sure that everybody has adequate nutrition, adequate income, and so forth is the principal thing that we can do to extend life expectancy around the world. Then, if we're concerned about everybody having access to life-extending therapies, that's a political project too. That requires making sure that those get through a clinical regulatory pathway to be approved for use in the population, and making sure that it gets included in the national health plan, making sure that you have a national health plan because we don't have one in the United States, and then making sure that everyone can have access to it. So these are all political questions when it comes down to it, unless you're only concerned about a billionaire having access to something on an offshore clinic. Then fine, yeah, they'll have access to whatever they want. But the rest of us, for us to benefit from any of the transhumanist technologies that we talk about, is a political project.
Are you on the same wavelength as that? Do you agree with those sentiments? What do you think about that? It's a political project?
If I get to a conversation with someone considering transhumanism, the future, and someone is interested enough to go into what is now and what should become, the first question that pops up into the terms of cryogenic storage and stuff like this is how elitarian is it gonna be? CRISPR, if we find a way to implement it if sufficient enough into the body in vivo, is this going to be a $2 million operation? Is this going to be, all the advancements we're making are brilliant, are amazing, but to implement and to distribute is going to be a really, really big task. And I'm happy to hear the terms liberalism coming from a socialist. That's interesting. That's not so common here. I hope we get there where we can offer this to everybody, no matter intelligence, education, forefathers, etc.
Okay, so on the liberalism point, I think it's interesting that people perceive, because of the Cold War and the disaster of communism, that there's some kind of tension between the socialist tradition and liberalism. In fact, organized workers were the ones who fought for and established the right for universal suffrage. They were the ones who fought for, in the 19th century, the early 20th century, the right to free expression. Labor unions have been key to that. And the whole social democratic and democratic socialist tradition in Western Europe has been central to fighting for freedom of expression, the establishment of the rule of law, the independence of democratic institutions. So social democracy or democratic socialism builds on a base of liberalism and liberal democracy. It's not in tension with it.
It's a good talking point. And I want to just dive deeper into this notion of distribution of the transhumanist technologies, because transhumanists advocate for the implementation of human capacities, like better human capacities through technology. We're talking about everything from what you mentioned, like cybernetics, CRISPR, gene editing, mind uploading, artificial, general intelligence to assist on the back of all this, So, but longevity embedded at the core. James, So a lot of people come on this show and they say it's all just going to go the same way as the mobile phone. It's, it starts off expensive, it starts off at a high price point, and then as the technology becomes better and as it gets as sort of the efficiencies emerge, the consumer side of the technology drops and it becomes accessible to everyone and more powerful, like this Moore's Law type scenario. Why are you saying that's wrong? Are you saying that the distribution of these technologies isn't secured, or is there something else you're arguing, or what? How come that is a bad thesis or a good thesis, or what do you say to that?
Well, there are plenty of technologies that haven't followed that course. Chemotherapy never got cheaper. There are a lot of things that don't follow an accelerating curve. It's actually slower to get from one side of Manhattan today than it was 100 years ago on a horse. If transportation was following an accelerating curve, we'd be going a billion miles an hour by now. So I think it's kind of cherry picking to look only at the things that got faster, cheaper, and grew exponentially. We may have technologies, and I make that argument often, that many of the life extension technologies that we hope for, health span extension technologies, may be as cheap as a vaccination, and would then save us billions or trillions of dollars of healthcare expenditures from diseases related to aging. On the other hand, it's hard to imagine that a stem cell printed 3D organ built on your DNA is going to ever be very inexpensive. In vitro fertilization is extremely uncertain for most parents and costs, $8,000 a pop. So I think there are certain technologies which, we probably eventually will have cheap, ubiquitous access to. There are others we're going to have to make all of those hard choices that every health system makes. Denmark extended universal access to in vitro fertilization in the hopes that it would increase their fertility rate. And not very many people made use of it because Europeans aren't having a lot of kids. So I think we're all going to have to face this question of how expensive is it? How certain are we of its benefits? How many risks do we know about? And whether we want to make it universally accessible on the public dime. Otherwise, we're just going to say, hey, rich people, you get to live an extra 50 years and nobody else does.
Well, what do you say to that? Do you think the transhumanists are cherry picking? Because you look at tech and read about tech all the time, all day, every day. Do you think that's right? That because you've probably heard that argument that it's always just going to get cheaper, quicker, faster, and that the distribution's going to become more ubiquitous, over time and more fairly distributed. Do you think that the government needs to play a role in distributing some of these technologies, or what?
Who are you asking?
You, Wout.
I think you.
Oh, me. Okay. If you compare it with a cell phone being distributed and first being like over 1K, or even back in the day, it was part of a car. I think it was more like an option in a car. For a cell phone, it's quite okay. It's communication, but you can go to a landline and do the same thing. There are technologies that are on the brink of being commercially available or FDA approved, that eventually will make this big of a difference in a person's life that you cannot wait for this gradual gradual descent in price. I think some solution. Well, if based on your money, some people can just be HIV free, and others still have to fear this, or maybe more. I was trying to avoid it, but if you increase intelligence by certain technologies, you will create a really, really big abyss in between people who are not able to pay or access this intelligence increasing technology versus people who can. There are some things you cannot just let roll out or gradually be implemented in society. There are some things that will have to be kept back totally until ethically decided to be available to all, which is maybe a topic. Maybe it's a utopia for me to think this way, but for some technologies and some applications, we cannot see people escape life and come back in a few hundred years after cryogenic freezing to just enjoy and take the fruit of people who kept going. Yeah.
I think AIDS is actually an interesting example because antiretroviral drugs in the early 90s in the United States cost about $40,000 a year. So impossible to imagine universal access. No one ever said, as they do about transhumanist technologies, that no one should have it until everyone could have it, right? They said, well, okay, it costs a lot and some people can have it now, and what we need to do is figure out how everybody can have it. Well, it turned out that the pharmaceutical companies who made those drugs didn't want to sell it so that Africans could buy it. And so South Africa and India and Brazil said, we've got people with HIV who need this drug. If you're not going to sell it at a reasonable price point where we can afford it, we're just going to start making it on our own. So politics. Are your countries going to observe international intellectual property law, or are they going to use a humanitarian argument to get around it? Well, then the pharmaceutical company said, okay, well, we'll make it at a cheap price point. And now it's available for $1 a day in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, $1 a day in Belgium, you could afford $1 a day if you had HIV. But do you think it's a good idea to have over-the-counter antiretroviral drugs? Or do you think it's a better idea to have it be provided by the Belgian health service when a doctor determines that you have HIV and monitors your care? I can't imagine that any transhumanist technology is going to be so safe and so certain that we won't want doctors to be involved in the process in some way.
What ethically, looking into the future, James, ethically, are you worried about any of these transhumanist technologies, like cryonics, for example, or anything? Is there anything on your radar that makes you go squeamish when you think about certain technologies? CRISPR, for example, gene editing. Wout said IQ raising, sort of IQ or brain enhancements. Do you get squeamish over any technologies, or are you a full-on optimist and ready to rock and roll?
Well, I think there's two kinds of risks. One is the risk to a person who wants to use something, and the other is the risk to society if that person uses that thing. I think we need a clinical testing process for anything that goes in our body or we use in our body. We probably need more technology assessment of artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, these other things. We already have environmental assessments about toxics and genetically modified crops and things like that. So we need all of that kind of assessment to understand what the risks are to the person or to the farm or whatever. In terms of a lot of the risks that people worry about in terms of exacerbating social inequality, or if one person takes a smart drug, then everybody has to take a smart drug to keep up. I don't consider a lot of those to be serious risks. What I'm worried about in that context is I don't think individuals should have unregulated access to superpowers, right? There aren't very many things that we can imagine in the short term that transhumanists are proposing that are real superpowers. I mean, adding 20 points to your IQ with a drug is not a superpower. Adding 20 years to your life expectancy with a drug is not a superpower. But if there are superpowers, and when I talk about this, I talk about things like tanks. Tanks are a superpower. And I don't want everybody to have access to tanks. Only certain kinds of people should have access to tanks. I don't think tanks should be banned, but I think that only certain kinds of people should have access to them. And so I think we've actually seen this narrative in speculative fiction now a lot. Avengers Civil War, the whole Avengers plot line was about, hey, what if we actually had people who could fly around and destroy whole cities and kill millions of people, apparently with good intentions, but they killed, a lot of people. Who should be responsible for those people? Who should be telling them what to do and holding them accountable? And that was the whole plot of Avengers Civil War. And the Watchmen now, all kinds of people are beginning to think, this fantasy that we could have some shining white knight with superpowers come in and that they would fight the supervillains and all that kind of, that's crap. The rest of us should have a say in the controlling people with superpowers. So whenever somebody wants to talk about something in a transhumanist technology that actually gives you superpowers, that's where I get worried.
If I may add, I am kind of worried about this because a thing like Neuralink is already existing, or is going to be, I think, clinically approved pretty fast, which is a very dangerous thing to put in your head, in my opinion. Also making a big difference in speed of communicating with technology. Imagine being able to write a book in 3 hours just by the rate of your thoughts being put on a paper. Is that book as valuable as someone not using Neuralink to write this trilogy, Lord of the Rings? Is it still as valuable if you write it in 10 hours? I don't know. But it's going to make a big difference, maybe even bigger than we realize. And it's not only always going to be that obvious. You're going to read a book, just as you did before. But the rate of books that you can deliver, if Neuralink is actually making you, it's general semantics. As soon as you can just express English thoughts and see them being put on a paper, the rate of productivity is going to be insane.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, you're talking about this mad scientist theorem where the IQ of someone to destroy the world drops by 1 IQ point every couple of years or whatever. That's kind of scary. I mean, that is the point, and it kind of brings us back to the sort of start of the conversation, which is the rise of fascism, because you have increasingly more powerful technologies in the hands of increasingly more agitated, edgy, and impulsive people. I mean, these are impulsive people, and they don't have stated good intentions to use their power, whether that be conventional power, power of the state as we have it, or these these advanced technologies. So yeah, I kind of understand why fighting fascism at this point in the historical curve would be an important thing to do. You know, Putin's running. What do you think of Putin? Saying that whoever controls AI will control the world. Do you agree with that, James?
Well, of course, we're very fixated on Russia here in the United States, and there's quite a debate about whether all of Putin's efforts are bluster. I'm pretty pissed off about the ways that he's intervened in American politics. I don't hold a lot of expectation that the Russian economy is going to be able to do much because it's incredibly weak and it's small. And I think they're not actual good competitors in the artificial intelligence market. The principal folks that we worry about for artificial intelligence and genetic engineering is the Chinese. And the Chinese just announced this week that they're going to start selling autonomous lethal drones to other countries around the world. I think speaking of the fascist threat, if we go in the direction of increasing inequality without any democratic checks, one of the things that's going to become increasingly possible is the replacement of human police and human militaries with various robotic forms. And that will allow an increasingly small number of elites to control and terrorize increasing large numbers of masses. And as we see with climate change, we're going to have a lot of climate migration, a lot of climate displacement, famines, water crises around the world. That's just going to exacerbate this particular problem, and the enclaves of the rich in the north will be protected by these robotic drones. So, I mean, it's a dystopian scenario, but I think if we consciously try to avoid it, we know what to do.
Wow, yeah, that makes me really enthusiastic about the future. But no, I agree, and it's something that we talk about here all the time: the collapse of Bretton Woods and this sort of global liberal system that's been implemented since the 50s. They're going to rip that out, and we're going to enter a new sort of semi-dark age, I think, where you're going to have more religious folks. We're past peak secularism now as well, so we're heading into that's gonna be really awkward, where you're gonna have more religious people with higher degrees of technology, and they're gonna try and hoard the rest of the secular people into producing them higher technology off the back of religious sort of motivations. It's and that's not the only thing. I mean, as you said, fascism as well. With increasing rising nationalism. European Union project was trying to be like the United States. It was trying to be the Washington, like you got Brussels there, which is trying to be Washington D.C. And because every time France and Germany go into a war, whether it's the Francos versus the Prussians or whoever, or the French versus the Prussians or the French versus the Germans, we always end up in a world war. And that's why the European Union project, built out of the coal, steel, tariff destruction treaty, whatever that was, I remember it, but that's why this was such an important project for global economic integration, because it doesn't matter about Greece and whoever down there. Italy's kind of important, but it's about stopping France and Germany from going to war, because every time those guys go to war, we end up in a world war, right? And that was the big one. But yeah, what do you see there in Europe? I mean, you've got this. I mean, you've seen the first sort of mini wave of this climate crisis already, and European and sort of intervention in the Middle East, where you've had a lot of refugees coming up from Syria and other things. This is only part one of this saga. This is not ending, and you can tell it's not ending by the fact that people overwhelmingly voted for Trump, who said build a wall. And what do you build a wall for? Well, you build a wall to keep people out, on the basis that in the future there's going to be a lot more arriving. So Trump might be a climate denier or whatever, but he's building a wall because he knows it's what he's saying is true. He knows that the instability globally is coming. What do you see there in Europe? The same thing? Do you see the same thing, increasing issues?
Let's say that I prefer the Wir schaffen das of Merkel much more than the let's build a wall of Trump. It's not because we are geographically born where we are born that we just should be lucky. Definitely, given the fact that the biggest reason for the climate change is coming from the countries that are still pretty okay, and maybe will suffer some sea level rise in 50, 100 years. So we're schaffen das. Welcome. Let's make it work. It's not because you fear someone with another culture or, as you mentioned, religion. I think it can go hand in hand. If we look back, our total algebraic system, our math is coming from cultures you wouldn't think they would come from. Science and religion went hand in hand for a lot of times. Only when some given thought patterns were totally challenged by, for example, saying the sun was in the middle instead of Earth, you get some issues. But for the rest, it's religion paying and funding and making sure that we got to the point where industrialization, our liberal system and capitalism brought us to where we are today.
Do you think the European Union project will survive, or it's going to go and it's going to evolve, or do you think European Union is finished? Do you think, France Nationale, Pegida, Brexit, these Brexit, Nigel Farage, whatever his name is in Italy. Do you think these guys are going to kill it off, or do you think that there is hope for the European Union?
There should be hope for the European Union. That's not really expressing my opinion on what's going to happen, rather than why we're going in this direction of a really connected world. So it's ridiculous to say this in 2019. I think in 96 I was being on time with mentioning we're being more connected. it's ridiculous to go more regionalistic and more bordering off things. I'm totally for a different culture and therefore also different guidelines that can vary depending on the place you are on Earth. Let's not be too globalistic here. But yeah. I think if someone as Corbyn in the UK says that the Brexit is the biggest mistake since Second World War, then you see that the referendums should be done again, inform the people and make the referendum happen again. And I think you will have a different outcome. For example, the European Union came from collaboration in trade, and nowadays is let's call it a buffer state in between Russia and America on this side of the planet. I think that it's good that there is some variation in sources, in investigation, in initiatives, and if you would all just separate and go back to just being countries on their own, without any agreement for passage of goods over the border, you would just commit some productivity suicide, and so many other collaborations are depending on this European Union. Yeah, it should only grow bigger, if you ask me.
Yeah, the Maastricht Treaty, that's the one I was trying to think of. It popped into my head halfway through there. So yeah, the Maastricht Treaty, grown out of the Maastricht Treaty, and you know, the Europeans have to remember the trauma of World War I and World War II and why they actually built that project in the first place. They pulled the whole world into that war, including my country, which is in the middle of Nowheresville. We're basically in the Antarctic down here, and we had to come up there and do a whole bunch of stuff. And so,
thank you for that, boat, by the way.
Yeah, the Europeans really have to just remember the roots of how important they are. You know, it's a small continent. I mean, it's a really small place actually, but very, 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 very loud voice on the global stage, and they really have to do that. So, moving over to the new world again, let's talk a little bit more about.
If I could just, continue. Say something about that. I mean, I think it's clear that we're moving towards a multipolar world. That the United States is no longer the global hegemon, and Trump's incompetence and his despising of the European institutions and global institutions has just made it clear that the U.S. is no longer in control of this. As Macron said this week, NATO is brain dead because the United States no longer has any interest in European security. So I think we need new global institutions to defend democracy. NATO and the European Union are the ones that we have.
Don't forget United Nations. Sorry.
The United Nations is also there, but you know, it's always been weak because it is compromised by having so many totalitarian, authoritarian regimes within it. So I think I've always been a world federalist, and I do think that should be a part of the vision that we put forward, a united world. It's always been a part of the vision of science fiction. I mean, science fiction's always thought that by now we would have a world government. And I don't see the path to that yet, but the European Union has to be maintained. It has to be held up.
Yeah, especially for the sake of this whole German-French peace. On the other, America's a big country, and you know you've got Europe on that side of you, and you've also got the Pacific on this side of you, and it's always had the Pacific. Well, it's, you know, once East and West were linked up, it's always had the Pacific over there. So let's go to China and talk about China. It's turning into a techno-fascist regime, right? And you mentioned China as part of your list. Let's put Russia aside. I understand that, but let's put Russia aside. Let's just concentrate on China, James. What is the problem with this techno-fascist regime? How did this come about? Is it the majority? Is it the people? Is it the fact that they're built out of communism? You know, from the Mao Zedong and all this, or what? Why is Taiwan different from China in this way? You know, it's the same ruling party. You know, they just rode the boat over there in the 40s, 50s, whatever. But why this techno-fascist regime? And then, yeah, what the other thing is, how is it? So is it liberal democracy that can defend against this in the United States? Because you're worried about this sort of being a testing ground for what could happen in the United States. So let's just talk about, on a more broad level, China, techno-fascism. Why is it a problem?
Well, first, let's just say most people would not use the term fascism in relationship to China, but I think it may be accurate because if you define fascism as an authoritarian regime that promotes racial nationalism and that attacks the free press, et cetera, all the things associated with authoritarian regimes, then it is one. I mean, the Chinese Communist Party has always relied heavily on racial nationalism, although they have occasionally tried to tone down the racial part of it, the Han Chinese part of it. But basically, the way that they behave towards their ethnic and religious minorities, the fact that they have 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camps right now, is
and no one talks about Tibet anymore, but Tibet as well.
Yeah, exactly. Well, one of the reasons you don't talk about Tibet anymore is because there are more Han Chinese in Tibet than there are Tibetans now. So they've effectively erased any possibility of an independent, autonomous Tibet. So I do think it's appropriate to associate, at least, what's going on in China with the global rise of fascism. The reason I'm more perturbed by China in the last couple of years is their Sesame credit score system, for example, which is basically the gamification of totalitarian control, basically giving everybody a score that is a combination of your economic trustworthiness with your political and social trustworthiness. You know, if you get caught on one of their facial recognition cameras jaywalking, your social credit score goes down and you can't take a plane or get into college or get a visa to get out of the country. If your friend of your friend criticizes or posts a Winnie the Pooh cartoon that is interpreted to be a critique of Xi Jinping, then you actually get penalized by that. So I think that's incredibly outrageous and scary, because it could, if it's successful, it could be the model of an entirely new form of totalitarian control that we hadn't even imagined before. You know, 1984 was child's play compared to that. So that's one thing. Then from a transhumanist point of view, they're one of the most openly eugenicist regimes in the world. They have laws on the books. They have attempted to control women's fertility since the 1970s with the one-child policy and now the two-child policy, with efforts to control women's periods posted in the factory wall, and to force women to have abortions when they have disabled fetuses. Now, I think it's up to women if they want to carry a disabled fetus to term or not, and I'm fine for women not doing that, but I don't think the government should be a part of government policy. Then you add the fact that they've been sponsoring research into genes related to intelligence and have allowed and then imprisoned because they got embarrassed this scientist to do his CRISPRing of these two babies, which turned out to not only it was a stupid experiment to begin with, and it shows why all this kind of research should be done under a regulatory regime and not do-it-yourself medicine or backyard medicine. But he thought he was CRISPRing out a resistance to HIV. He also apparently increased their intelligence. So this is a regime that will openly use every cybernetic or genetic or nanotechnological technology at their disposal to promote their nationalistic and I think deeply racist program. And I think that that's really scary.
Well, what do you think? China, techno-fascism, techno everything. What do you think?
They're not even trying to hide it or blossoming it up. It's the Silk Road. We're going to conquer the world. We're going to provide railroads to make sure economy is boosting. I am much more fan of a Japan trying to make ethics a foreground thing, where our communist China, I say our, but yeah, communist China is just trying to get rid of any democracy. It's going to be a technocracy in favor of the data addicted people on top. If you're going to make a surveillance system that is going to be predictive, you're almost going to say no, take an abortion because your son, when he gets 30 years old, is going to make a mistake, and we don't want it to happen. That's the way we're going. If China has its way, and I don't see why humanity should be proud of itself if we're going to be, more ants than human.
I've always seen, China is known as one of the outsourcing mega countries of the world. And I've always just seen that, for America, let's say America's factory workshop or whatever. But, I've always just seen that in the same thing in the political realm as well. I mean, Trump had Xi Jinping at Mar-a-Lago, not at the White House. Why did he do that? Because then they can have off the record talks, right? And same when Trump goes to China, and if, let's say, Trump, and I'm not saying this, but I am saying this, but I'm not advocating that this actually happened because I don't know. But let's say America wants to test out some stuff that it can't do because it actually has human rights laws and all that in America. I mean, why not just get China to do it? Because China doesn't have any sort of human rights foundations. And when you think about it, he went to Mar-a-Lago. So I've always just assumed that it's not necessarily America, but America looks the other way, and they purposely look the other way to see what happens in order to have this sort of outsourcing mechanism done. What do you think about that, James? Do you think America's looking the other way, or do you think they should stand up stronger against this sort of stuff? Because you don't hear big denouncements. You don't hear people from the Pentagon coming out about it. You don't hear chief scientists. I mean, you're not going to hear Betsy DeVos, or no one speaks out about this stuff. Nobody says anything. Why is America looking the other way?
Most of American foreign policy until the Carter administration in the 1970s was pretty nationalistic. It was clearly that we would pursue America's interests around the world. Carter was the first president who clearly said we're going to break with that we would have an American foreign policy centered on human rights. Now, it's always been inconsistent how we do that. And, we continue to be friends with Saudi Arabia, which is, a slave nation under a monarch who murders his political opponents abroad.
Khashoggi.
So I don't think it's ever been consistently applied. But in a sense, Trump is just a return to the realpolitik of the past of America first. Now, I think the irony is that Trump is probably far more compromised by foreign financial interests and mobster ties than we realize. And so a lot of his foreign policy, like his withdrawal from Syria, I mean, he had economic compromised position in Turkey that was involved in that, and it was to Putin's benefit. So, a lot of our American foreign policy now is probably being motivated by some backdoor deals that we don't really understand. But I'm for a human rights foreign policy. I don't know how far, if I was president, I don't know how far I'd be able to go. If I would be able to tell Saudi Arabia to go jump in the Mediterranean and an ally with the Palestinians instead of Israel, I'd probably get shot. But I think that is the direction that foreign policy and that international policy should go, is to uphold human rights regimes and condemn regimes which do not adhere to our standards. That's the kind of United Nations we should have always had, right? We should have a United Nations that went in and said, I'm sorry, you have to be a democracy. You can't be a monarchy anymore in the 21st century.
Yeah, Declaration of Human Rights is a fascinating and a great document, but it's powerless under the But I just, on this show, I've always just called the United Nations an arm of U.S. diplomacy. That's all I've ever said it is. When they're naughty, they get defunded. Yeah. Europe, though, you have a different idea. I mean, you've got like China, a little bit of influence in China. Huawei. You've got Central Europe, which is, so Belt and Road Initiative, what you were talking about. But actually, the European perspective on human rights is different, and they do stand up and they do make vocal. They can't do anything, but they do make vocal announcements. Why is that? Why is that different there in Europe? What's the game strategy there from Europe in terms of human rights in China?
Good question. I think the condemning of not letting people protest, censoring their internet, not allowing freedom of speech, putting people in a concentration camp where they literally have to learn and have to convincingly say that they love their king. Is it then, if it's a monarchy? Yeah, king. It's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. And on terms of are we going to go do more business with China than we are with other countries? I do not know. But let's say that 5G, if it ever comes there, if it ever gets implemented, that 5G antennas, networks, software topology will come from one side or the other, and I think that will be some kind of cornerstone or some type of milestone where we can see what government and the market is choosing. Are those human rights weighing hard enough, or the violation of it at least, are they weighing hard enough to make us reconsider economic gains? That's, yeah.
Or the security aspect of buying Chinese technology. I'm not sure that buying American technology has less risk than buying Chinese technology at this point, given what we know about Facebook and Google and so forth. But
yeah, totally agree. Yeah, but that, with the Chinese system, you know, all roads lead to the CCP, and I think that's what's more worrying. It's all there's no, like, at least in America they pretend to have corporations that are separated from Washington and from the political powers. I mean, at least they pretend. But in China, you know, if they don't do what they want, they just get the state bank to, you know, defund them, close their accounts, do whatever. I mean, or they give the, you know, they fire them in the huge bureaucratic municipal arrangement, or or the Great Purge. Xi Jinping, 1,000 people disappeared off the map who were corrupt, but really, actually, it's just political opponents from the old regime that you got to clean out. In America, you know, at least they sort of pretend to do it right, but in China they don't pretend. They just sort of go on and do it. It's kind of yeah. So, you know, so there is a little bit of hope there with America, because, like, I always use the example of of some of these South American countries that they have the water privatized, by Coca-Cola or by some of these big companies or whatever, or they have their rainforests sold off by by the governments that they want to protect. And what happens is, the government or the people, they can form a collective and they can actually fight a corporate, fight one of these corporations, especially if they're an American corporation. And it's not like the U.S. I don't mean like the taco bowl, whatever it is, the taco one, or the banana economic banana crisis that they had in the Caribbean. There was the economic hitman. I saw that documentary, The Economic Hitman, and there was
Banana Republic, do you mean?
No, it's not the Banana Republic. I kind of get what you mean, but like there was a corporation that went in there and they used the U.S. government to help them and they use, but that doesn't always happen. I mean, like there are ways to fight multinationals, especially American multinationals, if a government or a big group, get together and do fight it. But when you fight Chinese multinationals or fight Chinese corporates in different countries, you're taking not the company, you're taking on the Chinese government every single time, and sometimes your country is too small. If you go to some of these places, like little tiny places that are smaller and less wealthy, have less money than some billionaires you're talking about. For example, Samoa. If China comes in there and says, we want to build you a stadium out of our benevolence, that country can't do anything. All of a sudden they have a stadium there and they have to say thank you for it. You know what I mean? It's because you can't fight the Chinese government if you're a tiny little country or a tiny village or something. At least on a sort of marginal level, you can maybe take on a U.S. corporation, maybe, and the government might not care.
Well, I would say this is one of the good things about current Chinese foreign policy and the positioning that Xi Jinping is doing, which is that he wants to position China to be the good participant in the world order. He wants to tell the world that they're not the ones who would send their Marines to defend their banana corporations in other countries. They're trying to invest in your country. They're trying to build up the Belt and Road. They're trying to build your airports and your ports in Africa. But in the process, they're building up indebtedness of all these countries, and then the bill will come due at some point. But I think, between Russia's bellicosity, which is waging open military conflicts against Europe, waging open political subversion campaigns, open cyber warfare, Russia's one of the most bellicose powers in the world. It's precisely because of their weakness. China's sitting on a big pile of money, so they've decided that their approach to the world doesn't have to rely on military power. It can rely on their financial power. And the United States is someplace in between. I mean, I still don't think it's out of the question that the United States would send military power to back up corporate interests in other parts of the world, but we haven't done it since, the 60s.
Yeah, that's true, and part of the whole Belt and Road Initiative as well is a demographic idea. I mean, China is incredibly capital rich right now, and they're trying to just expend a lot of that money anywhere that they can. So yeah, I kind of and you buy friends temporarily. Maybe they'll get a bit out of it temporarily with this infrastructure projects. But once the money runs out, just like the Soviet Union found out, once the money runs out, a lot of these countries don't stay loyal to you forever. They just sort of go, hey, thanks for the infrastructure, and then they go and do their own thing. So there is that as well. For the last sort of bit of this conversation, I'd like to just mix it up. Let's talk about the future for a second and the positive aspects of the future if we can. Wout, what do you think of? Let's start with the future of autonomous vehicles. Where do you see autonomous vehicles in just in general through your research and stuff? Do you think they're on their way? Do you think do you think that? What do you think about the autonomous vehicles? Are you excited?
I am. I'm excited. I'd love to give up driving and spend my time reading. Instead, I have an hour and a half commute when I drive into Boston to my job. I only do it twice a week, but it's a long commute, and yeah, I'd love to not. And I've been in car accidents, and it's terrible. So I think autonomous vehicles will reduce auto fatalities and accidents.
It's amazing. Looking forward to see the first totally autonomous vehicles drive by. If there is a Tesla nearby, I cannot keep myself at least looking, is he touching the steering wheel or not? So yeah, it's a great evolution. It will definitely have some disruptive effects on people whose job is driving a vehicle, but we promise to stay positive. So let's say that it's a first step towards automation, allowing us to do much more of what we like to do with our day instead of what we have to, what is the case for a lot of people nowadays. Yeah,
I think another positive thing to say about autonomous vehicles is that before we had actual autonomous vehicles, we in techno-ethics fields were talking about what would happen the first time they killed somebody. Would then there be this popular backlash? Now there's already been a couple fatalities related to autonomous vehicles, and the public is just like, people die in car accidents every day, so this isn't really that different.
As long as it stays safer than human capacities, right. There is no question. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I really think that they're going to be much safer because the AI, if it's a global AI sort of learning machine, even if it's a corporate AI and it's everywhere like Uber AI or whatever, it's going to be learning on thousands of different vehicles at the simultaneously, if not millions of vehicles simultaneously, on all different road conditions at all different places around the world. All different variables. I mean, it'll be learning all of this simultaneously. And like, if you think about it, there's a low 22 kilowatt an hour, functioning consciousness that may or may not be drunk, or maybe you got the flu, or I mean, whatever. We've got all these problems with us, and they try and regulate that by saying, regulate it or try and assist us by saying, don't drink and drive and don't, whatever. But on the whole, this thing is going to be learning 24/7 a day. It's going to be sleepless. It's going to be learning millions of calculations per minute all the time. So, I think car accidents will eventually, through this sort of learning AI, autonomous vehicle AI, will just become the words car crash, car accident, fatality. It'll become a thing of the past. I think it'll just fade out of the human the English or the language structure eventually, and that's what I think. I hope, but that's a little bit down the track. But yeah, in the short run, yeah, absolutely, it's coming, and it will have disruptive effects. I agree, Wout. I think you're right there. Yeah, electric vehicles. While we're in vehicles, do you see electric vehicles as finally making a move? James, what do you think? You've got Elon Musk over there who's doing amazing things with electric vehicles. Not just autonomous, but electric. What do you think?
It seems to be taking longer here than we expect. I mean, I see a lot of electric vehicle charging stations. I think the big challenge with a lot of these kinds of technological rollouts is the chicken and egg problem of having the infrastructure to support the vehicle, right? It's if all you need to do is hook it up to your house, that's fine. But if you ever need to charge it outside, it can be hard to find one of those stations. And agreeing on the way to, having a hose that dispenses gasoline and having the standardization of gasoline that we have, that I don't know how long that took, but that's pretty ubiquitous now. But there's probably going to be 5 different kinds of ways that you can charge electric vehicles, and we have to figure out what the standard's going to be. Again, it's a public policy question. We could have electric vehicles. China is going to be ahead of us, both in electric vehicles and other forms of power like hydrogen-based vehicles, because they have the power to come up with standards and make them universal for 1 billion people.
Finally following up the UN, the United Nations can be very valuable. They give some directives towards banking, that the financial sector should get their funding out of oil and out of petrol, which took ages to do, but at least more than 10 international banks agree to finally get their funding out of oil. I think this is also a part of contributing towards transportation that doesn't destroy the world in the end.
Well, yeah, that sounds drastic, but cool. So let's talk about energy singularity and the future of energy. For example, the vehicles we were just talking about with autonomous vehicles, we're talking about the new form, which is electric, right? With electric vehicles, you need an energy supplier on the other side of that. And right now, I mean, there's a transitionary phase between fossil fuels, oil, petroleum, and out of that, James, what do you think? What do you think the future of energy is, whether in the car realm or whether you want to talk about geothermal or solar power or safe nuclear power? I don't know, whatever the type of energy source, wave power. What do you think? And you've got biofuels as well. I'm not sure what you think about those, but energy singularity or energy. What do you think the future of energy is?
Well, I take some of my cues on this from Ramez Nam, who's transhumanist and has written a lot about this topic. Mez is of the opinion that there's an exponential decline in the cost of and the increase in the efficiency of solar photovoltaic panels. And I have them in my backyard, and I'm happy with them. But when I put them in, I fully expected that long before I paid off the mortgage on putting them in, that there would be some better technology that I could implement, which is kind of a frustration. I think nuclear power, for me, climate change means that we have to move away from carbon very, very quickly. And nuclear power is really one of the only ways that we can do that, and at scale with the technologies that we have at hand. I hope solar comes to the rescue so that we don't have mountains of nuclear waste, but I'd rather deal with mountains of nuclear waste than continue the carbon path that we're on.
Well, what do you see for the future of energy? And you can bring in any of those ones, any energy topic you want, or multiple. Future of energy.
Yeah, look at Chernobyl, look at Fukushima. It is not 100% safe. Building a nuclear facility next to the water line might be very easy to have cooling for all those years, but yeah, you're planting you're putting a factory so close to tsunami or earthquake danger. It's really weird that it's happening. If we really want to go forth with nuclear, I heard that with a laser you could make the halftime of some radioactive stuff. Let's just call it stuff or trash. Yeah, you could down it. So there are solutions, but the current facilities are not sufficient in my eyes in terms of safety. There is not. It's not. Yeah. It's not an accident that you can get iodium here in the pharmacy, that it is available. So in my opinion, we should turn down or shut down, completely deconstruct the current facilities, and with the current knowledge and then our knowledge and skills of today, we should reconstruct and make it really, really safe, not make some budget choices over there.
Now that's the path the Germans are on, which seems to be working so far.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. That's the German idea right now. Seems like, and I think it is freaky. Fukushima is unfortunate because that facility was just about to shut down. It was months away from being shut down, and then it happened. But that's how it happened. And Chernobyl was an unfortunate accident as well. Apart from those two, it's actually got a fairly strong record. But the problem with it is the disaster is so big that you can't not talk about it. Which there might be multiple disasters a day with solar power, solar energy, or bits falling off and killing people. We don't know about that.
I haven't heard of a solar energy disaster anywhere, but
but that's the point, right? Because it's probably so small. Someone might have got a cut or something, but it's not talked about. But solar energy in space is something that is maybe plausible and possible by the mid-century, which would be really good. And that's a lot of energy right there, harnessing straight from the
fission. Fission is a perennial hope in our domain, but it seems as far away now as it ever was. So.
Yeah, and the Chinese are making big moves in nuclear as well, and it's kind of interesting. I'm
sorry, not fission. Fusion power.
Yeah. Fission.
I personally think that with renewable resources like wind and solar, we should be able to have 100% of energy. Nuclear is, in my option, or my opinion at least, a third option. Which I prefer not to follow, because even though you are really, really, really cautious, it can be dangerous. Where I don't see a windmill or a solar panel exactly be of more than a few people's harm. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the future of biotechnology. It's a big topic. What do you see there, James? Biotech. It's really coming to the form now. It's starting to really evolve now. It's starting to really take off right now, isn't it?
Well, biotech is a pretty big term. I think in terms of agricultural biotechnology, I think CRISPR is going to allow us to create new forms of crops, which we desperately need. We need to be able to feed a couple more billion people between the next decades, and in a world that will be increasingly unstable in its climate. It will have droughts and other kinds of challenges. So we need CRISPRed crops in order to be able to do that. We also probably need CRISPRed human beings in various ways. There's an interesting proposal this week, you can find it at space.com, that introducing tardigrade DNA into human beings could actually facilitate space exploration, because we are basically too vulnerable to space radiation to do anything outside of the Earth's atmosphere for very long. And the tardigrade has DNA which is 1,000 times more resistant to radiation than we are. So I think one of the things that is interesting about the genetic modification of human beings is not only the more proximate goals of making our children smarter and healthier and longer lived, but also actually enabling some of the things that we've been thinking about for a long time, like space.
Fantastic. What do you think about biotechnology, the future, enhancing ourselves? What do you reckon?
Of course, it is the future, but it's like always choosing a path in between building forward on what we know and we are live, so informing people. The misconceptions are still so huge. If I talk about GMOs with someone, something that could be a solution, we shouldn't be burning rainforest, but just maximizing profitability of what we already have. But as soon as you mention GMOs, people think about Monsanto and patents and farmers being sued because they use the wrong potato. It's ridiculous. So biotechnology on its own is a perfect tool, a solution. I would almost call it natural, as we humans are natural. So our capacity to start cautiously change DNA, for example, is a natural phenomenon. But on the information side of a point of view, this was already too in detail or too technic, which I really like, which I would really like to continue on discussing. But to people everywhere, biotechnology can help us. If you have the potential for cancer or a certain type of cancer in your family, CRISPR will be something that facilitates a solution even before any symptoms or before any growth that you would not like. So yeah, I think we should repeat all the benefits and the way people's life will be qualitatively increased, because apparently longevity is for some people not something to look forward to. So yeah, if we keep stressing out what biotech can offer to someone's individual life or the issues that are tormenting our world, I think it will only be there faster. The exponential grade, as they call it, will be quicker. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of these things, in world of preventative care, I guess. These smart toilets, the smart sanitation, that's really exciting. I wish that would come here a little bit faster, because that sort of stuff will be able to, map out a lot of future needs. Whether you're drinking too much alcohol, which I'm guilty of. Definitely. But whether you're drinking too much alcohol or you have cancer or, it'll be able to do all that, and you'll be able to, get, prevention is worth an ounce of a cure, right? So a pound of prevention is worth an ounce of cure, or whatever that Benjamin Franklin said. So I think that's really handy in the realm of biotech, because you'll know where you're going with your own biotech in a more simple way. Smart sanitation, I'm really excited for that. As cities,
I definitely agree with your approach there. I monitor my own blood pressure and blood sugar and other health markers to the extent that I can, and I think that the enthusiasm for wearables, it's obvious that people want more of this.
Yeah, and that's been the story of the early 21st century, is the wearable revolution. It's technology. Computers used to be far away, and now they're here, and now they're on our clothes, and they're on our wrists, and they're in our hands. It's even
worse. I'm carrying a microchip in my hand. Not sure if you can see it, even though it's not clinically approved yet or tested. It's even illegal here in Belgium, but it opens up so much. I could be so drunk that I turn up naked in front of my door and still be able to sleep a good night. So, for example, I don't know who would like to listen or hear that as a promotion talk for implants, but yeah.
You can get blackout drunk anytime you want.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've heard Belgian beer is very good. So it's like that. It's very good. I'm not sure though. Do you have the purity law there in Belgium?
What is the purity law?
Oh, it's a German. It's a German law from the
You only have 4
1400s.
ingredients.
Yeah, it has have special ingredients and done a special way.
Water, barley, hops, something else.
Oh yeah. It sounds like Belgian beer completely. I'm not a big beer drinker, so very atypical for a Belgian. Alcohol is something that I like in moderation, but being drunk is not really my thing. So turning up naked in front of my door with my chip is a very rare thing to happen.
Rare,
I
which
have
means
to
it
say that
happens.
the best thing that's happened to my health in a long time was we legalized cannabis here in Massachusetts 2 years ago. So I've completely, well, not completely, but I more or less substituted cannabis with for alcohol.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's illegal here. I refrain of any comments about that.
Yeah, no, that's okay. And so I didn't know you were a grinder as well. So that's actually I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. We have lots of you're the fourth grinder I've had on the show now. They're an interesting folk, and they're hard to get in touch with because they're always really busy, and it's hard to get an interview with them. So I really appreciate knowing that you're a grinder. And Zoltan Itzvan, the founder of the Transhumanist-Party, he was a grinder essentially. He's got microchips in his hand, so that's cool. And it's fascinating people, and I guess that's why you've got a lot. We'll go on about biotech another time. We're running out of time here, but we'll go on about biotech another time, and talk more about grinding as well. And maybe we'll bring on with another grinder because it's an extremely fascinating fascinating topic. So I think that urbanization is going to continue. What do you say, James, about vertical farming? Do you think vertical farming is the new food revolution?
I haven't followed vertical farming very closely, but on the same lines, there's this book by Stuart Brand about his revisionist thoughts about what it takes to meet the climate challenges of the present. And in that book, he makes the argument that GMO crops should be embraced by the ecology movement for ecological reasons, that nuclear power has a strong argument for it, although I take all the arguments against very seriously as well. But one of the things that he points out in that book is that cities are actually more ecologically sustainable than a more distributed form of population, that it's a lot easier to control and make efficient the use of resources and the control of waste in an environment that's where it's all concentrated vertically. So I would strongly support all forms of vertical organization of humanity, including vertical farming.
Interesting. What do you think? What do you see vertical farming as? I mean, you've got a beautiful agriculture industry there, especially over the road in France. But what do you see? Vertical farming? Do you think it's the future?
Yes, it is. But before that, I think reducing meat consumption and replacing those areas with vegetables and fruit, etc., will be a faster solution and the first one. But followed by vertical farming. Sure, if there would be a 10-story building next to me offering fresh vegetables that are trucks that are not running on the road, places that can be used for other stuff, it's definitely something that's going to happen if it is not already happening in China, etc.
What do you think about stem cell meat, Wout?
Stem cell research or
stem cell meat? Replacing livestock with stem cells.
A lot of friends are vegan, and I encourage that lifestyle, but I fail horribly. Meat is something that's really tasty, and my omnivorous ancient intuition seems to guide me towards it again. But it makes me feel guilty. I'm not gonna lie. Every burger or every steak is tasting as good as the previous, but makes me feel so guilty. So as soon as lab-grown meat meets the standard of the definition of meat in subjective terms, I'm all for it. And if that costs double, I'm more than willing to pay.
Me too.
Yeah, 100%. And there's some good shops around here in this Melbourne, even in this city in Melbourne. And basically, what they're trying to do is they're trying to compete with McDonald's on a commercialized level. They're trying to make it look like as if you're going into Macca's and you're just ordering Macca's and it's a vegan sort of experience. It's really interesting, and I wish them luck. And the burgers don't taste too bad either. This is just a vegan thing. It's not lab grown meats, but yeah, hopefully lab grown meats will become a thing, because you mentioned what well done about the rainforest, the Amazon rainforest, all the wildfires going through the rainforest, and how that's so bad. And well done, James, Provost James. Because Bolsonaro has been horrible, absolutely a horrible man. And he's just let the agriculture department run wild. He's let the big ag run wild, and it's totally ripping that country apart. And I don't call for wars too often, but it does sometimes feel like they do need an intervention down there. But I don't know. It's just supply and demand. It's a big problem, but. Yeah, like one of those issues is McDonald's. It's essentially soybeans, but cattle. I mean, it's the fact that you need to graze for cattle, and and they're expanding into the rainforest, which is the only rainforest we know in the whole universe when you really think about it. So it's just this tiny finite resource that's being done away, and it's not even like McDonald's is meat, sure, but it's also a lot of fat and a lot of sugar and it's the burgers, and it's been chemically treated to fit with our taste buds as a global human species. So we're basically a species addicted, and you're right to say each one tastes like the other one, and it takes a lot of effort to draw yourself away, because it's an addiction, because it's being chemically designed to keep you addicted. Like that, and as soon as we can get away from that, the better. Absolutely, totally agree with you on that. One final question for you both. UBI. UBI is an interesting one. It divides people. I think I might know I know where one of you stands on this, but I hope. But yeah, UBI. James, what do you think? Are you in favor of a sort of UBI idea?
Yeah, I have advocated for UBI for 30 years. I think it's very interesting that the debate about UBI, which I used to consider one of my many utopian proposals, which I probably never would see be taken up in the public sphere, has now been taken up in the public sphere. We have a presidential candidate, Andrew Yang, who is basically put UBI on the American debate stage, and it has. As a policy, it turns out to be pretty popular, even though Andrew Yang himself is probably not going to have a political career. But he has inserted it into the public debate. And Benoit Hamon, when he ran for the president of France, he did the same in election 2 years ago that resulted in Macron. And so I think it is beginning to be debated in a lot of different party platforms around the world. I think the interesting thing about it being seriously debated is that UBI by itself, especially since some of the people who are promoting it are these billionaires who are worried about the pitchforks coming to burn down their mansions, and they're promoting UBI as a way to mollify and pacify the masses, that we're now having debate about how we should implement UBI. What kind of UBI? What things would we get rid of in order to put UBI in place? Would we get rid of national health insurance? Would we get rid of public education subsidies? Would we get rid of housing subsidies and so forth? Or do we need to maintain all the existing forms of the welfare state and have a UBI, which is what I basically prefer? That would mean that the UBI would take a lot longer and be a lot slower to implement. In Alaska, we have the permanent fund, which is basically a couple $1,000s a year that every Alaskan citizen gets from a publicly owned petroleum resource. And it's incredibly popular. It's only a couple $1,000s a year, But the research on UBIs around the world and direct cash subsidies around the world shows that even a small proportion of people's incomes can make a huge difference. It can give them that extra economic security to allow them to make important investments in their own lives and in their homes. So I think that UBI is an absolutely essential policy for the future. I don't think it should be a replacement for the existing welfare state. I do think there are rich people who are promoting it basically to create a neo-feudal situation where everybody else gets basic and they get to hold on to all their wealth. And that's not the kind of future I want. But I think a real UBI would eventually be quite transformative.
Wow, fantastic. And what, you get the final say, UBI, what do you say? And thank you very much for staying up so late in Belgium time. Yeah, what do you say?
As it is 1:30 a.m., I agree on that note. I think it's a chain effect, as we will have automated driving and trucking without any trucker needing to drive the whole night. We will have to create a solution for the people who seem to be unable to get a job. First will be retraining and re-education, and where do we need people to work? What are your interests, and trying to make this work. But really fast, things like UBI will become a necessity. We have social security here in Belgium and for the most part of Europe, and most people are saying that UBI will be a replacement of social security. So if you're healthy and everything goes well, you're making money out of your day job and getting your UBI. If it goes bad, you will not have a day job and will have to pay all the bills and everything with this UBI. I think this is a bad evolution. We will, it's not what I think will be a good future. But more testing needs to be done. In Sweden, more than 54% of parliament was in favor of UBI. This is more than 7 years ago. Where is it? Where is the UBI? Where is my 5,000K each month? And I'm not even thinking about myself here. If we start with the lowest developed countries first and make sure that they get the brutto national product that the second poorest country has, and let's move up from there. This is something I strongly encourage, because implementing UBI just like this for everybody will be an impossible task if we keep our concept of money as we have today.
Yeah, something that really encourages me. What I think about, because I would say I'm a quote-unquote capitalist or whatever. I think capitalism is just the exchange of goods and services on that level. But as a system, I'm totally against it. If you understand that meaning. But one of the tenets of capitalism, this Adam Smith idea, is the consumer is always right, and the consumer always knows, and the education of this consumer, because if it goes wrong, they always blame the consumer. And with the UBI, especially, you mentioned underdeveloped nations, but developed as well. If the consumer has more time to analyze the different products, they don't buy always the cheapest products, because the cheapest products have been usually that you've taken a shortcut somewhere, the environment or policy, or you've taken a short or unethical creation. Sometimes the cheapest products are the worst, and if you don't have much money, you always buy the cheapest products, and that's a huge problem within capitalism, and that's one of the reasons that you end up with cheap plastic everywhere, because it's cheap to make, and in the higher grade, better quality, better lasting, more environmentally friendly products get left on the shelf because people just can't afford them, or they don't have the educated sort of idea behind it. Hey, that's where we got to leave it there. We got to run. We got to let Mr. Wout have a sleep. Thank you so much, everybody, gentlemen, for coming on. I really appreciate that. It's a really, and I understand why you're fighting fascism over there in Boston. It's a good cause, and keep it up. Thank you very much from Europe there. Fantastic, well done. Thank you. Great show. Any final words from anybody?
keep up the good work in whatever domains you do. I mean, I don't think everybody has to fight fascism, but those who are called to can. But I think technology. My daughter's a biologist and a scientist, and my son's a political organizer. I think they're both doing great work. So I think everybody needs to do what they do and keep it up.
Let's try to stay positive. Thank you for having me, and good luck both. Have a nice night, evening, day.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, and we're here mainstreaming transhumanism. That's what we'll be doing. And Benzion 2020, and check out any of these people below: Transhumanist-Party, TAFS, Talk Spectrum, Project 222, US6, Transpire.me, Keiko's Tech, Thrivus. Check them all out. They're all good transhumanist orientated stuff. Hit subscribe, all that stuff. All right, thank you everybody, and have a good night, good day, everything.